Welcome, everyone. Wonderful to see all of our participants here. We have a really, to me, an exciting subject as somebody who was a student of Edwin Reischauer and who's always believed that the notion of the broken dialogue and doing something about it is an important subject for both Japan and the United States and other parts of the world. And I think we have here today someone who can speak to that question. Probably I reflected on this better than anyone, possibly anyone in the world. He has long experience with U.S. Embassy Tokyo, as I think most of you know. He also, of course, has long experience here at SAIS. He goes further back at SAIS than I do. I don't know, maybe as far as almost as Fumiko and some others who are here. But so he combines a range of perspectives and insights, and from a scholarly perspective as well. I think you know Bill has a Columbia PhD in history. And I've always, in the 4.5 years that I was with U.S. Embassy Tokyo, I found his perspectives really valuable. So without much further ado, I think we should turn to our speaker, and then hopefully we'll have a wide-ranging discussion after that. He's going to be speaking on embassies and public diplomacy in U.S.-Japan relations. Bill,
okay,
looking forward to this.
Thank you very much, Kent. Now that I have a captive audience, I'm going to tell you a lot of tall tales. I won't talk about my fishing experiences in Japan or all the onsens I visit. I really want to talk to you today mostly about my own experiences in the embassy and practicing what I would call retail public diplomacy. And, you know, just to give you a little more background, my life in a nutshell has been a cultural journey through Japan. First, as a late teenager in the 1960s with the United States Air Force, stationed both in Okinawa and at Yokota. I just fell in love with the Japanese culture, its language, its traditions, customs, the arts, the literature. And I carried that over into college and then into graduate school, probing into Japanese history, literature, language, society, and religion. I even studied Zen for about a year and a half, doing Zazen in New York City, and gave up because I couldn't find enlightenment. I also fell in love with a Japanese woman who I've been married to for longer than I can count. And a very challenging thing because she came from a former samurai family, Bushi no Musume no Musume. So it was a challenge, but we are still honeymooners after many, many years. After teaching history in New Jersey, I joined the State Department and served 3 times, the last time for an amazing 15 years. And some of the experiences that I've had outside of climbing Mount Fuji and those fishing trips, I'd like to share with you today. This is not a technical or a theoretical talk today. I'm mostly looking at public diplomacy as a practitioner. And I'd like to share you some of the slides and some of the stories that I've had over the years, as well as to give you some of the examples where Embassy Tokyo has indeed made a difference in broadening or deepening the relationship between the US and Japan. And then at the end, I will close with a critique, not mine, but others, of public diplomacy since about 2010. So without further ado, I will share with you my PowerPoint. They're not 100 or 150 slides long, but they are more or less descriptive of what is happening at the front line of public diplomacy in the State Department. Here's the US Embassy in Tokyo. 3 tours, 80 to 82, 1987 to 90.
Dr. Brooks, sorry, you're not sharing your screen yet. Would you mind sharing your screen?
Okay, yeah. Let me just
Thank you.
close this. I pushed the wrong button and I apologize. Okay, here we go. Uh-oh. Could you put up your slides, Neve? Yeah, thanks.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Great.
My computer has a tendency to eat up the PowerPoint, so I apologize for that. So the first slide. Do I have capability of shifting it? Okay, the first, here's the embassy in Tokyo, where I served from 80 to 82, 87 to 90, and an unbelievable 93 to 2009. It's not a typo, I was there. They had to kick me out in 2009, but probably the longest serving officer in Tokyo history. At any rate, the public diplomacy with its subdivisions of cultural exchange, educational exchange, little understood or appreciated by the public. I remember an anecdote when I was a Foreign Service officer. I had vacationed in Alaska, do some fishing with some friends. And the guide came up to me during that week and said, Mr. Brooks, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a Foreign Service officer practicing diplomacy. And the guide, you know, a really old-time Alaskan, he sort of squinted, looked at me, thought about it a second or two and said, when you gonna get a real job? Well, you know, that put down is not necessarily unique. I don't think very many Americans know what diplomacy is at the embassies or even what the public diplomacy to do, what it really is. What I would like to do today is to take this opportunity to hopefully raise your awareness of public diplomacy by focusing on the implementation side, the practitioner side, namely the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, where I served through those long tours and postings over a 30-year career. First of those 3 postings to Embassy Tokyo, I was a second secretary in the economics section, and my portfolio included Japanese ODA, foreign aid, as well as multilateral economic policy, international organizations like the UN, and some macroeconomic reporting. The second time, 87 to 90, I was again in the economics section as a political/economic attaché, dealing with trade policy towards Japan. And the last posting from 93, first I was in the political section and later in the public affairs section to run both the Japanese language school, post-language school in the embassy, and more germane, to run the media analysis and translation unit, having a team of about 12 translators and media analysts in that area. So my talk today will be sort of integrated 3 aspects of public diplomacy, a quick look at public diplomacy formulated by the State Department's, what I call wholesale public diplomacy, the implementation of public diplomacy by Embassy Tokyo, focusing on the programs and activities of the public affairs section, including some outstanding examples. And then third, as I mentioned, my own personal experiences over 3 tours as a retail public diplomat. And I have to give credit to Margot Carrington for some of these slides, as well as Kat Tarr from the State Department. Next slide. This is the current chargé d'affaires ad interim, Joe Young. And he has been, unfortunately, in that job for about 2.5 years now, I think, because we still don't have a replacement for Ambassador Haggerty, who left in 2019. And I'll get back to Joe a little bit later. Next slide. Ambassador Mike Mansfield was my first boss. He was quite an interesting individual. When I brought guests to see Ambassador Mansfield in the ambassadorial suite on the 9th floor, he would greet them with, as you see, his corncob pipe. He would also be not wearing a jacket, but in white shirt sleeves. And he would also, I'm not doing all that. Okay. And he would also ask them if they wanted coffee. And he would have a copy of the Moosehead Gazette on his little table where we all sat down. So as the escorting officer, I would have to go into the back and make coffee. The worst coffee in the world. It was instant coffee. And then he would ask me to bring it in. I would bring it in. The guests would taste it and put it down and never touch it again. But an interesting individual who really had a command of how to deal with US-Japan relationships. And my job in the economic section really wasn't public diplomacy, but indeed I was asked many, many times to go out and talk to not only counterparts at different ministries, but also to the business world, the academic world, etc. So he's had me all over the place. Indeed, it was a very interesting experience. Cultural diplomacy was sort of the side effect of or the side business of the economic section at that time. My boss, the minister counselor, was interested in drama. So there was a time when he would recruit us to go out and participate in different kinds of activities. And I once had a walk-on role in a TV movie by NHK called Mariko. If you can get a copy of that new movie, which talks about World War II, you can see myself, Minister Barraclough as Ambassador Grew, and Bob Rees and myself as aides, storming out of the foreign ministry after war was declared after Pearl Harbor. So a little bit of history. Much later, as a public affairs officer in the early 2000s, I had another walk-on role in of all things, an opera at Akasaka Act Theater, 2000 to 2008, I think it was. And I played, who else? Commodore Perry. And my job was to walk through the audience and throw out little things. I can't remember what they were. I wore an ill-fitting Commodore Perry suit, and I got up there on the stage and had a very minor role. These kinds of goodwill events happen all the time. Most of the time, we go out and carry the palanquin for a local festival or join some kind of local group interacting with the neighbors, with the community, et cetera, et cetera. So that is sort of beside the point. Next slide, please. I think the most challenging thing I had during my second tour with Ambassador Armacost, starting in 1987, was to actually be part of a media strategy or an embassy strategy to win the hearts and minds of not only the people of Japan, but also the ministries, the officials, and the politicians who at that time were facing very, very tough negotiations in what was called the Structural Impediments Initiative. And we were trying to break into the market. My job as an economic officer was to find a way of getting into the Japanese retail market for American or other foreign companies, as well, both in terms of our goods, foreign goods, as well as in terms of investment into the retail distribution or wholesale distribution sector. I worked my tail off for that. We, as part of a team, both in Washington and in the embassy, we had different roles to play. As I mentioned, I was supposed to look at the distribution sector in Japan, and I found that not only were there allies who also felt in the Japanese industry, retail industry, supermarkets, even Calder, the Business Federation, they also wanted to open the market more. So the strategy was to co-opt your enemies and build allies among those who wish to open the market. And I think we were extremely successful. I take pride in helping to, in my own small way, to deregulate distribution, the large store law, as well as to get Toys R Us and later Costco into the retail distribution sector with their foreign investment. It was a great experience for me. And I know not only participated at the official level, I really had to work my tail off in order to find audiences that would listen to our explanation. We did it. We did it with small businesses. We did it with little audiences and large audiences here and there. My job was to go out and speak, preach the gospel about U.S.-Japan relations, and I did so in a very, I think, very positive and proactive way. So some of the things that I did in that second tour, I gave speeches at the Okuda Hotel. I gave speeches in front of Keidanren audience at Hakone. I wrote articles for Amiti Journal and other journals, including the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan journals. I met with representatives of small shops in Japan, as well as key figures in the supermarket industry and other retail area. The Ambassador Armacost, had regular media strategy meetings and told us where to go and who to meet. And he wanted also to know who to meet his so-called sparring partners as well. It was a very, very successful promotion of US policy. And of course, in the end, we won. And Japan won as well with the open market. We could go next slide. With Ambassador Mondale, who came after Armacost, I also got some kind of a commendation award, as you can see here. I have no idea what it was, but I'm sure it was good. But my recollection of Ambassador Mondale, which, he was extremely, had to deal with a lot of issues that were extremely difficult. One of the things that I recall, and this is sort of beside the point, that we found out that Ambassador Mondale loved to fish. And since I loved to fish, I tried for the whole time he was there to get him to go out fishing with me. The closest thing I could do was to get him to go shopping with me to buy fishing tackle, and he would take him off to Minnesota and fish. But at any rate, during that part of my experience, there was indeed, let me just get the, here, I have a list. Okay. At that time, the one thing that I recall indeed was the Okinawa incident, where in 1995, an Okinawan schoolgirl was gang raped by three American military personnel. And there was a huge national outcry. The alliance, the US-Japan relations, was on very, very shaky grounds. At that time, I was running the media and media translation and analysis unit. And then one time when the issues were really almost impossible to resolve, we received a 60-page document from a Japanese legislator who happened to be from Okinawa. And in that 60-page document was a history of the bases, going back to the Japanese bases, a history of bases in Okinawa. At the end of that long history, which was sometimes fairly sordid, was a list of requests by the Okinawan side. The Okinawan government at that time wanted a base, Futenma, deemed a dangerous base, this large marine station, air station, to be returned to Japan. Okay, my right-hand translator and I spent almost all of our time translating this long document history. My boss said, put a cover memo on it, send it to Washington, send it to the White House, send it to the State Department, the Pentagon, and I did. I sent it out. And within several months or so, President Clinton met with Prime Minister Hashimoto. And the announcement included the anticipated return of Futenma to Japan. I don't know if my memo had anything to do with it, but that's the kind of work that we did, where the actual translation and analysis of a particular document could change history. Well, the implementation of the agreement has been another story, but at least at that time, we brought the issue to closure caused by the rape incident. And after that, from time to time, I did go to Okinawa to do public diplomacy, meeting with different groups, academics, business people, the people who worked for the governor, and journalists, correspondents, etc., a large number of people, and trying to gauge the attitudes of those individuals or groups, and report back to Tokyo or to the embassy itself. So public diplomacy in that way was trying to win the hearts and minds, which was very difficult, of the Okinawans, and trying to gauge whether our strategy of trying to ease those tensions was paying off. My last Okinawa anecdote, again, was something which probably nobody would ever know. In the year 2000, then President Clinton visited Okinawa as part of the summit, but he gave a landmark speech in Okinawa, in which one statement was that he promised to lower the footprint, or ease the footprint of the U.S. In Okinawa. We translated that speech from English into Japanese. We spent all night. We got a copy from Air Force One. It was faxed to us, and we worked on it until the next day, and then we sent over the English version of that, the Japanese and the English versions of that to Okinawa, and it was passed out when the speech was given by President Clinton. So again, this is a kind of an example where we could, in real time, provide the Japanese side with what was in that speech. Next, please. And this is going back a little bit, but this is the kind of stuff that I did during my second tour. I wrote articles for different newspapers. This is from a magazine on distribution in Japan, trying to show how Japan's antiquated distribution system was actually hindering its economy, and that allowing for foreign imports to come in would open it even more, make it more accessible to Japanese customers who would have more choices and better prices, et cetera, et cetera. So I gave speeches on this. Next, please. At the Hotel Okuda, similar speech as that article, talking about how the reform of distribution, including the large retail store law, would be a win-win situation for Japan as well as the United States. Next, please. And then this was, again, an article was picked up or put together from a speech I gave in the Yomiuri Shimbun, talking about my views of the SII talks in 1990. This one was a winner because it reached about 10 million readers at one time. So we were able to basically saturate the entire Japanese a country with our media strategy, our public diplomacy strategy that stressed the positive sides and not just the negative sides of Japan opening its retail sector to foreign imports and foreign investment. Next one, please. Now, in 2005, I think it was, an extraordinary event began. This is a picture of the inner shrine at the Ise Grand Shrine, the Emperor's Shrine, the Amaterasu no Omikami, the Sun Goddess Shrine. And for the last 1,000 years or so, every 20 years, Ise, this beautiful shrine, which is pure Shinto, has been rebuilt, not every building, but the main buildings have been rebuilt every 20 years. It takes about 8 years from the start to finish. And somehow or other, I got involved with this whole event. It just was sort of serendipity. In order to start it, the Ise Shrine people, and actually the Jinja Honcho, the shrine, the headquarters for all of the 10,000 or so shrines in Japan, wanted to have foreign diplomats visit the shrine prior to the first event linking the past with the future. And Ambassador Baker was invited to this event. Unfortunately, the ambassador was ill, so it fell on to the cultural attaché, a good friend of mine, and myself to substitute for the ambassador and go as the first official visitors of the embassy that we knew of to Ise Shrine. And we could take our wives with us. We went. And we were treated just like the imperial family. We saw dances that only the imperial family could see. We were shown not only the shrine buildings like this, but also the entire grounds. It's like a huge domain. It has 600 families. It has farms. They even manufacture their own salt. So we saw the museum, we saw everything. So that incredible experience was the beginning of a very, very long relationship, oddly enough, between the embassy and Shinto Shrine Association and this shrine also. The Japanese side probably had an ulterior motive, I'm sure, because the badge symbol of Shintoism obviously was Yasukuni Shrine. The people that escorted us made it very clear, we have nothing to do with Yasukuni. They're not even part of the Shrine Association. And they even showed in the museum that the weapons that are in the museum that are used on display at the shrine cannot be used. The swords cannot be taken out of the scabbards. The arrows are unbalanced in terms of feathers, could never be used, et cetera, et cetera. So they had an idea of promoting the positive aspects of Mie, of the Ise Shrine, and our motive was to build good cultural relationships. This received a lot of publicity. The second part of this was the Ise Shrine had a gala event to start the whole process of rebuilding the shrine in Tokyo. And I was invited to give a speech in front of the august group of, God, I don't know who these folks were, but they were very elite type of people associated with either the shrine or Shrine Association or the very high elite of Japan. And the only other speaker, oddly enough, that gave a speech there, the foreign speaker, was the envoy from the Vatican. So I'm here next to the bishop or whoever the rank is of the Vatican envoy. He gave a speech. I gave my speech. my speech was in Japanese, and I thought that was the end of it. But Ise Shrine and Jinja Honsho began to cultivate a relationship with the embassy. For example, the embassy's cultural attaché was involved with promoting, hopefully doing most of the promoting, but I'm not sure, of sending some of the museum pieces of Ise Shrine to a museum display in New York City. There are a lot of other aspects of this that I could get into, but this is an example where, my own experience was just unique. So I really like to go around and give speeches at different religious organizations. We get to the next, please, next slide. Oh, this is just the rebuilding of the shrine. Next one, please. This one, this is my favorite story. In 2007, I was invited to give a talk in front of the statue of the Buddha at a very famous Zen temple in Tamba, Hyogo Prefecture, Japan. Next slide. And this is what I said. And it showed up in the Tamba Shimbun. I didn't know there was a Tamba Shimbun, but apparently it's read all over that area. It says, William Brooks, public affairs official, gave a speech. He gave a speech in fluent Japanese, interspersed with humor. I stressed the importance of the U.S.-Japan alliance, a solid relationship. The self-defense forces and the U.S. forces have arrangements for joint response. The alliance is not for fighting a war, but for deterring war, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is the kind of multiplier effect that I wanted to have, and the embassy wanted to have from our trips to different parts of Japan. And just to give you an example, I've given speeches to the PTA group in Hitachi, north of Tokyo. I've given speeches to different kinds of adult education classes, as well as to students. One of my friends teaches at the Meiji University, and he teaches cross-cultural communication. So he asked me from time to time to join his class who were debating particular issues. And those issues could be related to US-Japan, they could be related to the immigration policy, et cetera. So getting into that debate myself, I was part of the students, and we worked very hard to debate a particular issue over and over and over again. I gave talks to different student groups at Tokyo University, Waseda, other places like that. And because of that experience, in a small way, I was able to reach out to different young groups and influence their thinking. I even gave a speech at a nursing college up in Morioka. And I gave a speech also with another professor at the international university in Akita-ken. It's now closed down, I think, but at that time it was very, very active. So retail diplomacy, going out and meeting people. Another aspect of it, which I sort of take pride of it, was to network. In Japan, really, you have to do that. You can't just sit in your office. You have to get out and meet people. And this was a challenge because Japanese networking, at least in the media area, requires a very strong liver. I had to go out late at night, sometimes with a group of reporters, journalists. They might include other diplomats, part of a Benkyokai study group, but it really was a nomikai. But we accomplished a lot. We argued. They argued with me. I argued back. They told me that what I was saying was nonsense. I replied, but in the end, we were all friends. We tossed and turned. We trashed. We struggled, but we finally, in the end, agreed on a lot of aspects of the relationship that was very positive. So that kind of networking allowed me to get access to, the information that reporters often know, but never to talk about or read about or write about. But they never, except for my, preaching of the U.S.-Japan relationship or policy issues, they never used my comments in their reporting. So it was a very good relationship. We both benefit from that. And of course, I'm sure that our exchanges late at night over lousy food and good beer influenced their own reporting on the U.S.-Japan relationship. Next one, please. So there are many definitions for public diplomacy. This one here is very formal. A public diplomacy, a term that describes ways and means which states, diplomacy, association of states and non-state actors understand cultures, attitudes, and defined behavior, build and manage relationships, and influence opinions and actions to advance their interests and values. There's another definition. There are many, many definitions. The next one is perhaps a little more understandable. The original definition of public diplomacy came out in 1965. A professor at the Fletcher School of Law at Tufts University came out with the first public diplomacy in definition that still stands today, dealing with the influence of public attitudes on the formation and execution of foreign policies. It encompasses dimensions of international relations beyond traditional diplomacy, the cultivation by governments of public opinion in other countries, the interaction of private groups and interests in one country with those of another, the reporting of foreign affairs and its impact on policy. That was my job. Communication between those whose job is communication, as between diplomats and foreign correspondents, and the processes of intercultural communications. In a nutshell, you've got to reach out to the country and not to the government. Government-to-government diplomacy, sure, fine, but reaching the minds and the hearts of the Japanese is a much more challenging job. I did it in a retail way, in an incremental way. We had many programs, including the prime ministers, meetings with the different public officials, including the prime minister, or op-eds by our ambassador. But in essence, the hard job was to go out all over the country to meet with different groups. And that way, incrementally, it's hard work, but incrementally, you are able to get your messages across through this kind of retail diplomacy. Next one, please. But in recent years, that traditional diplomacy has been taken over by public relations firms that they do have a strategy, but it has a tendency to use what most people now use today, social media, hiring PR firms to do branding, for example, the Cool Japan or the Hail Britannica programs, and these kinds of programs are extremely important to reach a broad swath of that society, but they are not necessarily effective. So how did we mention, and how did we assess whether our programs were effective? Well, the easiest way, through opinion polls. My job in the embassy, the last tour, we translated almost every opinion poll that came out of commercial news as well as official news. And we analyzed those opinion polls on just about every subject. We commissioned polling services in Japan to carry out our own specific opinion surveys. And we also targeted different groups, whether they were young people, students, elites, or just average people. And then we analyzed those polls, not only to make sure whether our programs or our images were being projected across the Japanese spectrum, but also to see what the Japanese were thinking of us. And when we found that things were not so good, we had to do something about it. I'll give you one specific example, which is in just a very tiny one, but we tried to set the record straight whenever the press, the media would have fake news or false accusations or completely screwy ideas about the United States. The one I really recall was a national monthly journal came out with an article about our ambassador, Ambassador Foley then, and claimed that he had told a colleague when he was in the House, when he was a legislator in the House, that the Japanese are stupid. I can't remember the exact word, but here it was, and millions of people were reading this. Ambassador Foley called Japanese people stupid. Well, we had to investigate it. We found out that the person that wrote the article had heard it from another person who probably heard it from another person. It was total hearsay, it was total nonsense. We had lunch with the deputy editor of that magazine, and he promised never, never, never again to have that particular person who was very anti-American write an article for that magazine, particularly one where he attacked the reputation of one of our officials. So that was a very small case, but there were lots of other garbage type of stuff that was floating around. In that case, I would have to take a look at the broader aspects of these. I once did a cable, for example, analyzing anti-Semitism that was breaking out in parts of the media in Japan and assessing that. Other times it would be something else, most of the time positive stuff, but occasionally negative stuff as well. Next slide. This is really bureaucratic. I got this from the State Department, so I'm not going to explain to you, but in the, and next slide, please. In the State Department, this red circled section deals with public diplomacy, public affairs abroad. There's an undersecretary, an educational and cultural affairs section, and a global public affairs assistant secretary, and then a combination called a global engagement center. Next one, please. In the embassy, much simpler. We have a CPAO, a country public affairs officer, and then the section, public affairs section is broken up into a cultural side and an information side. The information actually just means press. So press information officer is a press attaché. And then the assistant IOs or information officers down below handled all the different aspects of the press section. And my translation unit was also part of the press section. And of course, Naha, Fukuoka, Osaka, Kobe, Sapporo had also PAOs, public affairs officers, that were charged with carrying out missions. We usually had a mission plan, a strategy, and we carried it out based on that mission strategy. A lot of the activities were not just cultural, but educational exchange, trying to get students to, Japanese students to enroll in US universities, and promoting exchanges of cultural actors, bringing in speakers and artists and singers, etc., dancers from the United States, and so on. And then, of course, the press section, which I belong to, focused more on policy. Cultural affairs focused mostly on the cultural ideas and the educational ideas. And my section focused on promoting US policy goals in Japan. So a kind of a division of labor, but we usually got along very fine. Next one, please. I think the biggest thing that I witnessed after I retired was something that the former, then was the CPAO in 2016, Margot Carrington, put together with a team of public affairs officers and local officials, local employees, to arrange for President Obama's visit to Hiroshima, a major historical event. For years, there was a debate going on within the State Department, within the embassy. Should an American president actually go to Hiroshima? Wouldn't that be apologizing? And we don't apologize for anything. So this was a real major breakthrough where President Obama wanted to go to Hiroshima in his final year in office, a major historical event. They had little time, they put it together in record time, and it was a great success. Next slide, please. And this picture symbolized people all over Japan, US, and the world saw President Obama embracing an atomic bomb victim at Hiroshima. Major breakthrough. And that desire by the Japanese to see an American high official, they had seen high officials come to Hiroshima, but they had always wanted to have a president, a sitting president to come. It happened. He didn't apologize. He just respected the dead, and it was extremely successful. And I would say bringing World War II, the bomb issue, to closure, reconciliation between the two countries, without having to go through the agony of apologizing for the war. Great success. A friend of mine who has now passed away, Mr. Fumio Matsuo, wrote a book about wanting to see a president come to Hiroshima and a Japanese prime minister go to Pearl Harbor. And for him, that was his life work after he retired as a reporter. And Mr. Matsuo's dream was satisfied just before he passed away. Next slide, please. And of course, Prime Minister Abe paid his respects at Pearl Harbor, as you can see, meeting with survivors of that terrible event. Oh, somebody wrote a note that Mr. Modi, if you can see it in the chat room. Hold on, let me just get that. The survivor is Mr. Modi, who devoted his retirement to finding the identities of the American POWs who died in Hiroshima. He succeeded. And there is a documentary, Paper Lanterns, about this. Thank you, Mindy, for that. At any rate, I think this was one of the most successful public diplomacy campaigns or events that has happened, at least from my perspective. There are other ways of reconciliation, but we can talk about that if you want during the Q&A period. Next slide, please. Today, public diplomacy strategy in Tokyo, Embassy Tokyo, is based on more or less what the Embassy and the State Department has put together. Indeed, they support the Womenomics agenda, and when Ambassador Kennedy was in the embassy, that became a top priority. And indeed, that's another win-win situation. Exploiting the momentum of Tokyo 2020 Olympics, now 2021, hard to say, not the problem of the embassy, but the problem of the pandemic, whether that will be successful or not. Robust cultural and educational exchange. There are many programs that exist that are trying their best to bring more and more of the two sides together. Promote the United States as a study abroad destination. Again, the pandemic has kind of made that difficult, but I think ultimately that will happen. And then, of course, enduring grassroots ties between the US and Japan. And that too will redevelop soon after the pandemic is over. And then finally, leverage the influence of existing bilateral organizations, alumni networks. So in general, that's what the embassy's public strategy is now. And probably if you went back to the time I was there, with exception of the Olympics and Womenomics, the last four are probably pretty much standard. Next slide, please. I'd like to go into some of the major challenges that exist for the embassy. And going into this, I'm not going to name names or anything like that, because my comments are criticisms of the embassy in the 2000s, what they did and what they did, they could have done better. It's not my view. It's actually the view of the Office of Inspector General, the OIG, which in 2015, Alicia Campy says the annual Cherry Blossom Festival. Yes, indeed, of course. In 2015, the OIG carried out an official inspection of Embassy Tokyo. And I looked at the section of that. It's available on the web. It's been declassified. They have a section on public diplomacy. And what the report revealed was that the public affairs section had suffered deep cuts in its budget, a 26% cut, and that the staff also had been cut severely, including local staff and others. For example, 17 local employees' staff positions were cut because perhaps the salaries were considered too high. It's true that salaries of local employees are high, but cost of living is high in Japan. So it's, you know, you can't give them slave labor, low wages if they're not going to do that. And then according to the report, staff cuts started in 2009 and continued to deepen in 2012. So I must assume that because of those cuts, which I don't think have ever been reversed, the section is still struggling. The public affairs section is still struggling. The OIG inspectors discovered that, to its horror, that the public affairs section, quote, does not have a public diplomacy strategy, unquote. I hope they do have now, but at that time they did not. And according to the report, as a result, the staff didn't know what the embassy leadership wanted it to accomplish in Japan. Why no strategy? But part of it was a crisis in personnel issues referred to above, a lack of morale in the section, and no clear requirements from the front office about what they should do. At my time, we used the mission plan. We knew exactly what we had to do, and we got direct orders from the ambassador's suite. And then the local employees, the staff members, were not receiving a clear guidance on what their goals were. So apparently there was not much coordination among embassy elements. The people, sections were doing their own things. The inspectors gave kudos to educational exchange programs, women's issues, and other initiatives that were more or less, but Margaret Carrington says the cuts were part of a worldwide realignment of resources to allow state to staff up in places. And I'm giving you these details. You can rebut them later on if you wish. I only know what I read in the report. Connect USA, a youth-oriented social media account with 35,000 daily followers on Twitter, was given a plus. According to this, more than 80,000 viewers had looked at an 8-part video series on YouTube on cultural events, including a poetry contest. The American Center in Japan was trashed in this particular OIG report. Since then, the American Center in Japan, which used to have all kinds of events, including a library access, has been closed. It doesn't exist anymore. A lot of the things that they used to do are virtual events right now. And then the ACJ at that time allegedly was not even being incorporated into any public diplomacy strategy. It was operating on its own. So this was a highly critical report due to all kinds of reasons. I don't know how the OIG recommendations were acted on. All I do know is that this kind of problem exists. The one thing that I really noticed was that they did not have a program to send out officers, language officers, to give any kind of speeches or to participate in any large events where they could present the U.S. point of view and influence the opinions of a wide swath of Japanese public. So this, according to the report, language officers were no longer addressing the Japanese public in various formats about a variety of topics. It was, in the report's view, a waste of professionalism and language skills. So this is a brutal indictment by the OIG. I don't want to end on a negative note, but I did find that, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, you didn't have it. What I wanted to do was show, go up to slide 2 or 3. Slide 2 or 3. Next one. Yes, I do wanted to show that Joe Young, the current charge d'affaires, our interim, because we don't have a new ambassador yet, has been doing a yeomanship work as a public diplomacy practitioner. He has a Twitter account, for example, reaching a large audience in Japan. There's a dialogue with photos, video clips, and of course tweets reaching out to average citizens in Japan. Logging onto that, you can find a long list, a wide variety of activities, events, points of view. So take a look at it at the twitter.com/USAMB Japan. These tweets, of course, do not rise to the level of policy, but they are informal chats. But indeed, from what I can see, congratulations to the ambassador and the ambassador charge d'affaires for doing a wonderful job. You can also see him on Facebook. There's much more voluminous coverage of embassy events, cultural, educational, etc. In a lot of areas like NASA or Black History Month that you wouldn't normally get if you read the Japanese newspaper. So facebook.com/US Embassy Tokyo is where you can find what the embassy is doing right now. Well, let me see. I think I'll close it there. I probably raised a lot of eyebrows already, but I wanted to give you my own perspective, not a technical perspective. Generally, my experiences in the embassy have been extremely positive. There have been some tough times like 9/11, as well as the different base issues. But in general, I've had a very broad and very, I would say, self-satisfying look at Japanese society and a chance, at least in a microcosm way, of influencing views in Japan through my many, many friends and contacts over the years. I've just given you a few. Some of them I can't even remember because I did so many things. But these are the ways I think that things get done in Japan. It's not just social media. It's not just Twitters and Facebooks. Language officers have to get out and preach the gospel, reach out to people make friends, network, and try to bring the two countries together through their own personal retail diplomacy. And I'll stop there because I haven't got any moisture left in my mouth.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was really extraordinary. And as I look at our chat and our list of participants, we really have an extraordinary group that is so knowledgeable about this subject. I'm pleased, and I've always thought one of the strengths of the Reischauer Center I'm happy about is that we have been able to bring a number of people with embassy experience together, and also to serve as a community for many friends from elsewhere interested in the embassy. And I'm sure that this is something that Edwin Reischauer would have appreciated. Let me just ask one brief question, and if people could, who have comments or questions, if they could put that, just raise that blue hand up there, and we'll try to get to as many people as we can. But Bill, the one question that I had, we're of course moving to fairly soon to another cycle and a new ambassador in Tokyo, no doubt in coming weeks will be named. And you've given quite a bit of implicit advice. The one thing you didn't talk about much, and of course, funding is always a problem. I wondered if you had any thoughts in terms of if there were funding to do some important incremental things in the public affairs area. And I guess I personally hope that public affairs would be a priority.
Mm-hmm.
What would they be?
Okay, let me just step back a little bit to go back to Ambassador Schiefer, Tom Schiefer, who ran he was the ambassador who ran the embassy in the part of the 2000s. He had an approach to budget cuts that was really drawn from his own broad business experience. We would have periodical right sizing exercises. The entire embassy would have right sizing exercises where we all had to sit in small groups and then in larger groups and look at two things. What are we doing right? And what could we do better? And the groups were made up of different sections, so you could actually interact and not just defend the fort. And because of those right-sizing efforts, the ambassador could rebut broad cuts in the budget that made no sense. In the one size fits all, you just get rid of half of the people because you're just trying to cut money. But if you know your resources and how you can use them properly and even make them better, you have a way of defending from those different cuts. So he was able to fend off the gremlins in Washington that wanted to make sure that the budget was balanced every year. You just can't keep cutting and cutting and cutting and expect people to work harder and harder and harder. The morale is bad. And of course, as you saw in the OIG report, there is no cohesiveness. People are just trying to save their jobs in the end. So that's one aspect of it. You have to stabilize the budget. You can't just keep cutting it, and you can't slice people off helter-skelter. Sure, if somebody's not doing their job, you get rid of them. So the right-sizing effort, I think, is a way for public diplomacy to manage its resources and not just be afraid that, oh, next year they're going to cut my position. Mm-hmm. The second part of it, of course, is, as I alluded to, is that you really need strong leadership at the top. Ambassador Armacost was a genius at that. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, and he told us what he wanted us to do. And then the managers of the different sections would go out and tell their troops what they wanted to do. So there was and of course there was cross communication among the different sections. I tried to encourage that myself, working with other sections, whether it was this agency or that agency, whether it was military or civilian. That kind of cross fertilization, you know, sharing ideas, meeting, not in a formal way, but just networking. When we translated something from Japanese into English, a real hot button topic, a real important part of our job was to send that information out. And I had a huge list of recipients. And so that by email, by telegram, two ways to go, but emails would be sent out immediately to Washington, to Yokota Air Base, to every part of the embassy, alerting them to what was going to happen, so that when it did happen, we could deal with it. We could deal with it together. So that aspect of balancing or stabilizing the budget and having a strategy and implementing that strategy logically would be what I would tell public affairs today.
Thanks very much. We have an extraordinary group here. One person that I would be reticent about not mentioning and recognizing and perhaps inviting to start a commentary, Russ Deming. Professor Deming served, of course, as not just charge and DCM and in many positions with the embassy, and we all served together at one point. And I don't know, Russ, do you have, just before we begin all this, do you have any thoughts about what Bill has said?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. That was great. That was really wonderful. Brought back lots of memories. One thing, you know, I think you might want to touch on is sort of the bureaucratic tension between public diplomacy and traditional diplomacy. Yeah. Which is, you know, tested by USIA, used to be an independent agency for a long time, and prided itself on it being independent, did not want to take direction from the State Department or even from the ambassador, and had its own program. And this came when I was in Japan the first time in the 1970s during the Vietnam War. I remember USIA, very independent at the time, brought out speakers on their speakers program that were opposed to the Vietnam War. That drove the political section and the ambassador nuts, that the U.S. government was spending people to come out to talk against the policy of the U.S. government. And it meant that the political section had to put somebody on the same panel to refute what the U.S. government paid invitee was saying. But USIA took pride in that they were independents. They represented the United States beyond partisan politics, beyond specific policies. Of course, that has all changed. 25 years ago or so, USIA was pulled into the State Department over the many objections of many in USIA, and it's a much different outfit now. And you would never see that thing happen now, with USIA firmly under the State Department and fully integrated into the policy apparatus. So could you talk a little bit about your experience about the tensions between the old line diplomacy, State Department, and the independence, the desired independence of public diplomacy? Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. The USIA during the Cold War had a completely different mandate. When the Cold War ended, that mandate fell apart, and so it was integrated into state, I think for the better. There was a USIA culture that I think resisted policy and focused mostly on just exchanges, cultural exchanges, educational exchanges, programs that were, as you pointed out, bringing in speakers without really knowing that they would cause, you know, a landslide in Japan. And I was part of the integration process. I was brought down in the year 2000 from the political section. My section was moved into the public affairs section, and I encountered, when I moved down there, the USIA culture. So it took several years to work that out. I don't want to go into the details, but I had some very difficult years when I integrated into the press section because of the clash between the old culture of USIA, independent, want to do whatever they wanted to do, and my own sort of political and economic background, where I saw policy as the most important part of my area. So I lived in a kind of limbo for a long, long time, getting pushed and pulled in different directions. But and actually in the end, this is again sort of off the record, even though this is a public comment, we actually went and had different country team meetings to justify the existence of my own translation unit. And I responded by making master plans, by having different surveys of our customers, what they wanted, and finding out what we could do to make it better. So it took a long time to actually become a positive force in the embassy rather than just part of a USIA operation. But in the end, we were doing policy, we were promoting US policy, we were promoting the ideas and values of democracy, and we serviced all the embassy and not just a part of the embassy. Now, as far as cultural stuff is concerned, that is perfectly fine as long as you're bringing speakers who have been vetted. We also had a visitors program, and for all of my 3 tours, I always tried to find individuals to propose as visitors to the United States that would again have the multiplier effect. A young reporter who just wanted to know what was going on, perfect. A small business person, perfect. So I would sort of single out those individuals who I thought would benefit the relationship by coming back with bright ideas and understandings. It's the retail part of it. So I think over time, the clash between the USIA culture that you described and the policy side, which the press section had, that clash gradually became much more productive and positive, rather than we could actually interact, as I pointed out with the Isa shrine thing. We were actually be able to interact in a way which benefited the US Embassy, US government, US views of US policy, as well as the Japanese side. So the independence of USIA is gone. And I think if they had the kind, as the OIG faulted, if they had the kind of direction and leadership, indeed, your comments about the way things used to be would be certainly taken into consideration. I have a very positive view about that.
Thank you, Bill. I see that we have a question in the comments, or with her hand up, Riho Aizawa. Riho?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Thanks.
Can you hear you? Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. I'm very interested in your very fantastic talk, and I have 2 questions if I can. The first question is about public policy on the grassroots level and your assessment of the means based on your experience. So could you talk more about your experience about going out and meeting people directly in Japan, and how you personally assess the grassroots effort for public diplomacy? Did you find it productive or effective? How was it different from other ways for seeking a better relationship between the United States and Japan? And related to the point, do you have a specific memory about some responses from the Japanese people you met? Like that.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, put it in perspective, is that there are a lot of programs, grassroots programs, that are both from the US or from the Japanese side. So in terms of the JET program, for example, or other grassroots, there used to be a John Manjiro Society. A lot of these programs, I think, do a lot of goodwill between the 2 sides. My own perspective was to target different audiences, whether they were students or adult education, or whether they were business people. I even gave lectures to the then Japan Defense Agency. But I could never, except with a few exceptions, reach the entire Japanese audience. That was basically the ambassador's job, to give interviews on TV, to write op-eds, to give speeches. My job was to grassroots with selected groups. And as I mentioned, there were a lot of these groups. My own sort of odd experience was with the PTA Association of Hitachi, Japan. I gave a talk about U.S. Educational system based on my own daughter's experience in the public schools in New York City. This was really interesting. I'll give you another example in a minute. But the parents, when I told them about the Gifted and Talented program in the U.S., where children who have great potential are singled out for certain programs or even certain schools, and they can accelerate faster than the other students. The parents told me, oh, no, we would never do that. Everybody's got to be educated alike. We can't possibly do that in Japan. So they were perfectly happy with the educational system that they had, where everybody had the same standard. And if you were very smart or not so smart, you had the same load. And then another example, there was a time when I had to judge a speaking contest, not alone, but with others. There was a big diplomatic, the foreign ministry had sponsored an English speaking contest of students who had just come back from English-speaking countries. They had been overseas in the United States, Australia, Canada, et cetera, et cetera. And the overwhelming theme among all these speeches that I heard was that these students had felt that when they were in the United States, they could speak their mind in class, they could give their opinions, and nobody would tell them to shut up. When they got back to Japan, again, this was a theme in all different speeches, they felt that they couldn't speak up in class. The teacher didn't want to hear their opinions. They didn't have the opportunity to speak out, so they kept quiet. And I think this explains a lot of the problems between the two societies, as Japanese students are educated all the same standards, and they can't even express their views very strongly in class, or the teacher would tell them to keep quiet. That may not be true all over Japan, but certainly was true in those English-speaking students who were in that contest. So that kind of gave me an understanding, is that really, in order to reach the hearts and minds of the Japanese public, you have to be extraordinary. You have to go beyond just giving information. You really have to have a dialogue, a two-way dialogue between the two sides, so that they will understand why you do things and you will understand why they may agree or not agree. Without that dialogue between the two countries at the grassroots level, you might as well just put everything on Twitter or Facebook and let it go at that.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. We have an extraordinary group, as I think a lot of you know. I noticed that Carolyn Glassman, who is currently Minister Counselor for Public Affairs in U.S. Embassy Tokyo, has joined. I don't know, Carolyn, if you have any thoughts. And then also, I think we'd like to hear Margot Carrington, of course, who was previously also PAO. I don't know. Carolyn, are you there?
Oh, I am. Thanks, Kent. And it's great to hear you, Bill. I'm sorry I'm coming on very late to the program. Speaking of U.S.-Japan relations, we had a very late evening last night because of the Japanese just announcing an agreement on host nation support. So it's been quite a late evening for all of us. But thank you, Bill, for your comments. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, we're doing all that we can now to continue, as we did 24 years ago when I was first here, to continue to identify, key audiences and to continue to engage and have that dialogue that you're talking about. I wholeheartedly agree with you that of the innate importance of continuing to engage and give Japanese from all different walks of life the opportunity to hear from us and to speak with us. And I have to say, I see some change. I mean, initially when I arrived here again 4 years ago, I was noticing that very little had changed in the way, for example, on the issue of gender equality and on women's rights here. Yet now with the latest incident with Mori-san and his comments, it seems to have touched a nerve here. And we're noticing as we engage with people, whether it's in person or even online, that and even internally within our mission as we continue to dialogue, that that there is greater interest, particularly among women, in having their voices heard. And, again, we'll continue to dialogue with that particular audience. We've done a lot this year focused on the issues of gender equality and diversity, which are important for us as Americans, but just to have a dialogue, not to be prescriptive, mind you, but to give at least folks a chance to, as you say, have their voices be heard. And so we're looking forward to continuing to engage on those and other issues at the grassroots level, as you said. And thank you. And I'm sorry I'm coming in so late. I hope you recorded this so I can watch the entirety of your remarks, Bill, at a later date.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carolyn.
Yes, Carolyn.
Thank you.
We did record it and we will get that to you. Thank you very much for.
Yeah, I'd love to share it out too with our colleagues throughout the mission. I'm sure that that they would really enjoy hearing Bill's comments, and it's great to see both of you, even if it's only virtually. And just please trust that we're doing, the yeoman's work here to continue, doing all the right things in public diplomacy. And I'm really proud. We have a fantastic team here. Margot knows this quite well, and I'm so proud to be leading them because the work of public diplomacy is continuing unabated and really going full force. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Margot, I don't know. Do you have just a few words? We're just about finishing up in 5 or 6 minutes, but do you have anything that you'd like to add or question for Bill? I should mention Margot Carrington, I think people know, was minister counselor who hosted President Obama at Hiroshima, and is another one of the great specialists over the years.
Right. The anecdote about Hiroshima, Margot gave a talk to my class about a year or so ago about that whole planning and execution of that event, and I have to give her tremendous credit for that. She may have left the scene.
Yeah, she may have left.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do we have any other special questions? I've been checking the blue hand button. Anyone else who would like to ask questions? Well, we've had an extraordinary, I have to say, to me, this is, it's really been educational and moving, having spent time with the U.S. Embassy Tokyo, and I think very, very appropriately too at the Reischauer Center, because of course the broken dialogue with Japan was the classic piece that Edwin Reischauer wrote, and it seems to me that in every generation, of course, in many ways, connectivity is rising, and we have social media, and we have so many more forms of communication than we once did. And yet, the issue of the broken dialogue and the basic problem that Reischauer presented, that Japan and the United States face each other only across an ocean. And they face each other because across the Pacific, they're directly just right across the Pacific. And yet it's the largest and the widest ocean in the world. And of course, he was speaking figuratively as well as literally. But the problem of U.S.-Japan public diplomacy is it's a difficult one. Bill Brooks has done an extraordinary job in dealing with it sensitively, as people like Carolyn and Margot have also, and many others. I saw we had Robin Barrington. I know Glenn Fukushima, of course, has long experience in U.S.-Japan relations. Russ Deming was here. I hate to mention, because there's so many people, this has been a very large webinar and a group of people who know the two countries well. So Bill, I think this is a real tribute to you and to the contribution that you've made.
Well, I thank everybody for coming, and thank you for your kind words. I certainly have a lot of other stories to tell. Maybe at a future time we can call the next one tennis diplomacy and fishing diplomacy, because we did a lot to bring people together all over. I even was involved in 1989 in a sport fishing tournament, a marlin fishing tournament off of Shimoda. The American Embassy team, believe it or not, we were part of a Japanese team, and we caught marlin. And then I had my picture taken with Miss Marlin. The picture disappeared soon afterwards when my wife found it, as I've never seen it again. But we did a lot in that. And tennis diplomacy, I even had a chance to, in a doubles tournament, to play against one of the princes, the imperial princes. Naturally, he won the game, but it was a great experience indeed.
Well, Bill, this is just the first. I think everybody agrees that we ought to have a repeat here, so we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everybody too. It's a wonderful group, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.
See you all.